Emotions are a part of our daily lives. Whether we like to admit it or not, they affect what we say, how we treat others, and even how we see ourselves. Yet, most of us were never really taught what to do with them. I can't speak for all Asians, but from my own personal experience as a Korean American, I can definitely say that I wasn't taught how to handle emotions. Isn't it common to be told to just be positive or to calm down or even to not let something get to you? So instead of learning how to actually manage what we feel, we're usually taught just not to feel. And in fact, we're usually told to just be stoic. But every day, emotions move through us. Think about the joy you may feel when you hear your friend's voice or your partner's voice, the frustration you feel when you're stuck in traffic or stuck in a long line at a restaurant, maybe a sense of unease when something just doesn't feel right. Oftentimes, I bet most people just push through these feelings or just shove them aside, only for them to resurface later. But by doing that, we are denying ourselves important pieces of information. Emotions are information. They're signals, signs, data points that are trying to communicate your needs, your values, and sometimes your desires. Emotional regulation is the ability to identify, understand, and guide your emotional responses. And it's a skill that anyone can learn. Developing that skill of emotional regulation can transform your ability to make decisions, strengthen your relationships, and improve your overall health. Today, I wanted to talk about emotional regulation or emotional identification. Emotional regulation isn't about erasing your feelings or just trying to stay positive. There is such a thing as toxic positivity, right? Rather, it's about recognizing, naming, and exploring your emotions, allowing your emotions to guide you instead of drive you. The truth of emotional strength is that it doesn't begin with suppression, but with understanding. So, why does emotional identification matter? First and foremost, it's important to understand what emotions are. What I mean by that is that emotions nowadays seem to have become labeled as an inherently bad thing. A lot of people, or maybe not a lot of people, but it seems like society favors people who don't use emotions to drive their thought processes. And while that may be useful in certain situations, that isn't always the case. Think of emotions as your body's way of sending you information, a manifestation of information that your body is reacting to, almost like the notifications you get on your phone. Some examples may be like anxiety, which would be your body trying to tell you that something feels uncertain, something feels a little wrong. Anger might be a signal that a boundary was crossed or that you are about to be harmed. Joy works towards giving life meaning. Emotions, at the end of the day, are a biological response to stimuli. We evolved to feel them because they helped us with survival as tools, each with its intended purpose. Another example would be like fear. We evolved a sense of fear to protect us from certain dangerous obstacles or harm. The challenge comes from the fact that many of us were never taught the language of emotions. Instead of identifying specifics like frustration, envy, or anticipation, we often default to broad labels like I'm just, like my last video, when we say I'm fine, or I'm stressed, or I'm upset. This lack of vocabulary makes regulation harder because you can't manage something that you can't name or identify. Without names, you lack clarity, and without clarity, you get misdirection. So that leads me into my next point, which is the power of naming emotions. Are you familiar with the literary trope of the true name? This motif is prevalent throughout world mythology and literature, and is the idea that knowing a subject's true name gives you power over it. I can give you some examples. In ancient Egyptian religion, one's Ren, or their true name, is a core part of an individual. Knowing or erasing one's Ren would grant control or deletion of that person's existence in the afterlife. The goddess Isis, the mother of Horus, took advantage of this and tricked Ra into giving her his true name, or his Ren. Once Isis knew Ra's Ren, she used that knowledge against him and essentially gained his divine power and got his approval for her son Horus. Another example is in the Odyssey by Homer. Odysseus comes into contact with a Cyclops named Polyphemus. During their interaction, Polyphemus continues to ask Odysseus his name, and Odysseus gives him a fake name, which translates to nobody. But eventually, Odysseus, out of arrogance and being overconfident, he eventually discloses his real name to Polyphemus. Once Polyphemus learns Odysseus' real name, Polyphemus uses it to call upon revenge from Poseidon. Now, from that point on, Odysseus' journey back to his homeland is filled with relentless obstacles from Poseidon, all because he disclosed his name and allowed Poseidon to identify Odysseus as his target. A more modern example is actually from an anime or the anime slash manga Death Note. It's quite literally revolves around using a person's name to kill people. The Death Note itself is a notebook in which the user can write the name of the target. Upon writing the target's name in the notebook, that target dies. So this is a very on the nose example in which the name is used to literally kill people. It's important to note that in the Death Note, it clarifies that it must be that person's real name. A large portion of the conflict in that story between the protagonist Light and his antagonist L comes from the fact that Light has to try and find out L's real name. L uses his pseudonym, L, to almost protect himself, and Light just can't kill him. These are just some examples. There are plenty more examples, and if you can think of more or share more, please feel free to comment. I'd love to learn more about some. I think it's a really interesting literary motif that comes up in globally, not even just in Western literature. But in these examples of the true name, when it comes to emotions, that same rule applies. You can't control what you don't understand, and you can't understand what you can't name. When you say, I'm angry, that's a start, but dig deeper. Are you angry because you felt disrespected? Because you felt unseen? Maybe because something felt unfair? Identifying those distinctions matter. Just like in those stories that involve the concept of the true name, if you can name your emotion precisely, what causes it, and why you're feeling a certain way, you begin to access its root. And once you access the root, you can respond instead of react. There is an important distinction here between reacting and responding. A reaction is how you act from a stimuli without any thought. An example would be someone hits me and I go, ow. I didn't think about wanting to say ow. The ow just came out. Or another example may be at the doctor's office, a common test that pediatricians will use on kids is when they hit the child's knee, and it's almost like a reflex. The knee will kick up. That is a reaction. A response is different in that you receive the stimulus, you process it, and think about how you wish to respond. It's not immediate. You give yourself time to process and then decide how you want to act accordingly. Naming emotions isn't about labeling yourself. It's about giving yourself direction and power. Now, my next point is about almost like the art of exploring feelings. So emotional exploration is like tracing the thread that connects your feelings to their source. It's finding out the why behind the way you feel. Let's say, as an example, you feel irritated after a conversation with a friend. Instead of immediately judging the emotion, I shouldn't be mad. Pause and explore. Use guiding questions. In this example, ask yourself, what exactly triggered this? What does this emotion want me to notice? What unmet need might it be pointing to? This is what we call awareness. When you explore your feelings, you're building a bridge between emotion and logic, between the part of you that feels and the part of you that reasons. And that bridge, that's regulation. Because emotional regulation doesn't mean suppressing how you feel. It means guiding how you respond. It's noticing that your anger is rising, breathing through it, and choosing your next words with intention and not reacting to the emotion. It's allowing sadness to exist without letting it consume your day. Emotional regulation is like strength training for the mind. You don't get stronger by never lifting weights. You get stronger by feeling the weight, then learning how to lift it with better form. My next point is what happens when you ignore emotions. Many of us probably grew up with subtle lessons that sound like, don't cry, shake it off, or stay strong. These phrases might have been meant to be comforting, but over time, they teach a dangerous habit, which is silence. Silence tells us emotions are interruptions instead of information. They teach you that the emotion is a inconvenience rather than a tool. Ignored feelings don't disappear. They redirect. Anger becomes sarcasm, sadness turns into fatigue, anxiety hides behind perfectionism. Unacknowledged emotions leak into the body through tension, headaches, sleeplessness, and burnout. Ignoring emotions is like ignoring a smoke alarm. Just because you're ignoring the smoke alarm doesn't mean that the smoke isn't there. The signal doesn't stop just because you refuse to listen to it. So then the next question becomes, how do I strengthen the skill of emotional regulation? And like I compared to earlier, emotional regulation as a skill is just like lifting weights. It takes time and is something that you can develop. Like any skill, emotional regulation requires practice, patience, and intention. Here are some things that helped me. The first thing is what I like to call mindful awareness. Notice your internal state without judging yourself. Throughout the day, check in with yourself. What am I feeling right now? Where do I feel it in my body? Emotions don't just live in your mind, but also in your body. It can manifest physically in like your chest, your jaw, your gut, and awareness begins the process of regulation. Certain examples include maybe when you're angry and you clench your jaw. Maybe you feel yourself clenching your jaw, but you haven't recognized that you're upset yet. Another example is maybe your shoulders are tensed up. Again, maybe you feel that physically, but you don't feel the emotion, or you haven't identified that emotion yet. And that might mean that you're feeling anxious about something or uneasy. So next time, try to be aware of those physical manifestations of the emotions. That helps you identify what you are feeling in that moment, even if you aren't aware of it at the time. Second is trying to expand your emotional vocabulary. I challenge you, instead of defaulting to basic answers like mad or sad, learn to name subtler emotions like resentment, guilt, jealousy, hope, contentment, curiosity. The more precise you are with your vocabulary and the more effective you are at naming what you're feeling, the more control you have over your emotional state. 3, in my personal opinion, this is one of the harder things to work on and something I'm actively trying to work on. And it is practicing cognitive reappraisal. Now, what that means is when you feel a strong emotion, take a step back and ask, is there another way to see this situation? This does not mean denial. It means broadening your perspective. 3 leads to 4, which I'm calling build emotional tolerance. Don't rush to escape the discomfort. Like I've been saying before, emotions demand to be felt. That's why they're called feelings. Allow yourself to feel the feeling because it's trying to tell you something. Sit with it. Just as physical muscles grow through resistance, emotional muscles grow through endurance. Finally, 5, express. Don't explode. Find healthy outlets like writing in a journal or any form of movement or exercise like walking, weight training, or sports. Conversation, maybe talking to a friend or a family member or a loved one, and even therapy. The goal isn't to eliminate emotion, but to express it in a way that releases rather than damages. Remember, every time you choose to notice instead of numb, breathe instead of react, reflect instead of lashing out, you're training that skill and actively becoming better. The real power and benefit of emotional mastery comes with realizing that emotional regulation isn't about perfection. It's about progress. It's about shortening that distance between reaction and reflection. Like I said before, reaction is the immediate response you feel or act upon when you are presented with some form of stimulus. Reflection is that moment in time after an event has occurred where you think back on it and maybe think about what you could have done or how you could have done it better. The goal of emotion regulation is shortening that gap. That way you are able and capable of doing that ideal response in that moment of reaction, rather than having to think between all that time. Remain hopeful. What helped me on my journey of being better, which, by the way, doesn't mean that I'm not growing. I'm actively trying to improve myself every day and just do better, just do a little bit better than the day before. But something that's helped me is recognizing that emotional regulation is not an inborn, innate talent or ability that everyone is just born with or reserved for just the lucky few. Like any other skill, it can be developed. A set of neural pathways and habits that can be strengthened with practice, just like learning a language or training a muscle. So just remind yourself, every time you pause to name an emotion, you're strengthening the part of the brain that is responsible for emotional regulation. You're strengthening the part of the brain that is responsible for self-control and reflection. It's like doing a mental rep. The more you identify, the easier it becomes to be present when emotions surge. Small choices create big change. Everyone sees the end product, and a common conclusion that people make is, oh, I wish I did that, or oh, they're so fortunate, or oh, they're very lucky. But the truth is, big accomplishments happen from small changes that built up over time. Regulation grows with tiny, repeated actions. Taking one deep breath before replying to a tense email. Walking for 5 minutes when your frustration is starting to build up. Or choosing to journal instead of just bottling up your anger. These actions individually may feel small, but each time you do it, it reinforces that neural circuit for balance. At the end of the day, emotional regulation isn't about never feeling pain, anger, sadness. It's about letting those feelings exist without letting them define you or control you. This is a very important distinction to remember and keep in mind. The goal isn't to silence emotion, it's to learn its language. Don't let the emotions control you. You control the emotions. Those emotions exist. Those feelings that you are experiencing exist because your body is trying to tell you something. So listen to when it's speaking to you. To recognize that your feelings, even the difficult ones, are not enemies, but messengers. If you can learn to name them, you can understand them. And if you can understand them, you can guide them. And if you can guide them, you can grow from them. So the next time a wave of emotion washes over you, pause, listen, and ask yourself, what is it trying to say? Every time you do that, that's where your strength grows and begins. And that's not from control, but from compassion. It's not from suppression, but from understanding. Because emotional strength isn't about hardening yourself. It's about learning to hold yourself fully, honestly, and with care. Thanks for watching. Let me know your thoughts. I'd love to have an open dialogue with you. See what are your experiences in controlling your emotions. It's something everyone has to do. If you disagree, I'd love to hear that too. The goal here is to always be better.